All right, let's talk about a couple of techniques, not all of them, but just a few of them to composite two different images or combine them in some way. The idea is to have some sort of a landscape in the foreground, and I'm in 3D Designer here to render it. And in fact, I'm going to get something like a side view. So I still have some parts in the bottom here that are also showing the background. The background color I set to a fairly saturated blue. Could be any color, but ideally a color that we don't have in the terrain, so we can use it to identify what parts we want to make transparent. Right. So we can also adjust the height, perhaps. Depending on how your scene is going to be composited, you may want to have that in terms of the perspective, the amount of perspective distortion here. Let's say, for instance, let's go with something like this. You may want to work with the light source too, so that the light comes in maybe from the left area around here, something like that, and perhaps bring it down a little bit lower. And also perhaps even colorize it. So you have a light color 1 here and a light color 2. Light color 2 will make kind of a reddish, so we pretend to be nearby a red giant. So there's a general reddish light, not so bright, just a tiny little hint. And then we have perhaps a bit more of a bluish light coming from a star that we will have somewhere in the far left there. So a light blue. Don't put too much blue in there because we don't want too much blue really on the terrain, since we're going to use the blue screen here to identify the background as transparent. Now, if you need to have it really strongly blue, then you need to change the background so there is no commonality between the background colors and the colors you see on the mountain peaks, for instance. So maybe you can make the background color green, and then we essentially going into what's called the green screen, something like that. But of course, if you have some vegetation on there, there may be some green valleys, and you don't want those to turn transparent. Sometimes you go with something different, like pink. Just a unique color that is easily identified and easily only present in the sky. All right, I'm gonna go with this. It's not necessarily my favorite, but we can always do some more changes on the hue, on the coloration, and so on after the fact. All right, so I'm gonna render that, and at high quality, anti-aliasing level 5, pre-filtering. Maybe you want to reduce a little bit some of the sharp jaggies, or just have it really detailed. Reduce the pre-filtering here, and then go and OK that. So we have this image, and there is a background that we want to make transparent. Now we can pick this up in a couple of ways. First of all, we'll store it. All right, so here's a store the image, and one way to identify the background as transparent, sometimes you use a paint tool. There are a couple of brushes that paint on alpha. Basically, the selection mask is in the alpha channel. Right, so there is a couple of brushes that you could use. For instance, a hard brush, 50 wide. As you paint, you may see a color, but when you let go, it actually makes the selection mask on that. So you're not modifying the colors, you're modifying the alpha channel. It's a global alpha channel. There's just one global alpha channel. It's a selection channel also, if you want to call it that. Let's deselect it. And so another technique, other than going in very detailed here, zooming in and making your selection along this, that would be tedious, but sometimes that's the only way to do it, or to add something to the selection, right? With the left button, you select. With the right button, you could deselect, right, from the inside or the outside of the mountain, and correct some of that. So a better way in this case, that's why we laid it out with a single unique color, is to just use some of the tools like the magic wand tool. Right here, the magic wand, you simply click here. But you got the other one down here also that you may want to keep transparent, even though you'll probably paint over that, maybe some foliage brushes or something like that. Or maybe another landscape with some rolling hills in the foreground. But for this particular mountain scene, it'd be nice to combine them. And you can, in a couple of ways, you can shift click, and then both of them are being added. You can store this selection too. When you work with complex selections, it's always a good idea to store it and even to save it. And in fact, when you store the image, just like here, when I stored the image, it also stores the alpha channel that's present, the global selection mask at that time. So there's an option that you can use to say replace the alpha. Remember when I stored this image, I didn't have the selection mask yet. So when I replace the alpha, you don't see the marching ants anymore. You don't see the discoloration. That's all a function of the show marching ants and the overlay mode, right? If you don't have the overlay mode, um, you sometimes can't really tell for sure which side is selected and which side is not selected, because all you're seeing are the marching ants. Here, let me use this stored alpha, replace this. So you can see the marching ants here. We call that a little row of ants going along this series. This does take some extra time, and sometimes you want to disable that. Not disabling the mask, but disabling the visibility of the marching ants. So you can say, well, let's turn them into marching termites. You never get to see those. So marching ants and the overlay mode. See, right now it doesn't have the pink or purple coloration, but if you enable the overlay mode, you do see that. It's a multiply to pink, so if it's black, you won't see it. It can't get darker than black, but if it's any other color, you might see a little bit of a discoloration into the pink or purple, magenta, something like that. All right, so that's one starting point. We need to select the background and then really flag it as transparent. Unfortunately, it's the opposite of selecting it. What we need to select is the mountain range, right? So simply invert it. Now, if you took a snapshot, or if you didn't, you could still do a get alpha. So you have a snapshot here, and you can work with that. This is a grayscale image. Okay, it has just black and white here, but you could blur it, you could do other things. There's a lot of selection tools here to grow the selection, shrink it, do some transforms, adjust it. Right? So you could do some value adjustment on that on the alpha channel, not the colors behind it, not the RGB values from the main image, but the alpha channel is an 8-bit value. And what you can do also is simply invert it. Click invert and then replace it, put it back into the stored image. Now the background is deselected and the mountains are selected. All right, so that's what you want to get. That's where you want to be, and at that point you could simply store that image, and you have an image with an alpha channel that is transparent on the background and fully opaque or selected on the mountains. That you can combine in a couple of ways. Now, if you have that other image, let's go and clear this and clear the alpha channel too. If you have the other image, let's say it's a starry field, what could we use? Perhaps render star field. Yeah, let's use that with perhaps smaller but more of them. And yeah, so we have some star field. And of course, there's much more that could be done with that. Let's see if we can do just one. Render plasma noise with a mode that will be perhaps the less than mode. Or, yeah, there's not much happening. It's already dark. Let's do the greater than mode. And that's not exactly better either. Okay, well, you know what? Let's not waste too much time on what the skies look like. Let's just have some skies. Oh, there you go. That looks fairly interesting because it has a little bit of a globular forming, and especially if we turn this into a grayscale. Let's see, through the color lens, we can get, oh, nice. This area here looks pretty nice. Right, and then maybe adjust the contrast a little bit with that too. There you go. And you know, you could go further with maybe some light diffusion, so the bright parts kind of glow into the darker parts as well. So here's a nice little background sky. It has a few stars. You could easily paint some more. There's a couple of paint brushes. There's some effects or organic effects. I always forget which ones. There, starry. Now that's a very deep, highly dense star field, so you'll probably need to adjust some of the parameters. If you go into the settings here for the brush, let's pin this down, and you could adjust a couple of things like the size of these if you needed them smaller, opacity even less. It isn't an additive mode, right? So that's something to realize. When you do stars, you want them to be added usually to the background. So if you keep painting over the same area nearby, you'll get a star cluster that gets brighter and brighter. But you could sometimes work it with screen mode as well. We're using additive here. You could also make the random position a little bit more displaced, more randomized.